yourself and say like what your role is at DNR?
Sure. Again, my name's Mike Chandler. I am the Ag Lease Manager for Department of Natural Resources. Been with the department, 29 years now. Been with the state 33, and kind of started, I've had quite a few hats here with DNR. I was a district wildlife biologist for most of my time here at DNR, and then moved into the Springfield office and managed the CREP program, which is a joint program between USDA, FSA, and DNR, and then I became the Ag Lease Manager 4 years ago.
Very cool. Lindsay, how do you want to do this? You want to read the questions from me? I guess it doesn't really matter. I'm not sure how we're going to edit this on the back end with the questions.
Yeah, I can ask them. Yeah, so just the first thing that we hear a lot about, and we talk a lot with our affiliates and members, is that people are often really surprised to learn that DNR manages farmland in Illinois. So do you want to just give us like a brief overview of the Ag Lease program and why does DNR involved in farming?
Well, that's a good question. People, really ask that all the time. And, let's kind of look at the big picture. And, agriculture is a huge part of wildlife management. We need agriculture to manage wildlife because of the resource. And what we try to do on our state sites is try to keep the agriculture and the habitat, spatially distributed to where it's equitable and provides good habitat. And in doing so, just kind of, when we talk to our tenants, we want to provide a good cropping plan and a good management plan for them to where, it's going to be beneficial for them, where they can, make some money, farming it. But on the same time, we got to realize that we're going to manage this property, for the resource and for the constituents of Illinois, so we can provide recreational opportunities, hunting opportunities, wildlife viewing opportunities. So, so with that said, that helps us to kind of keep the program moving in the right direction. And, obviously it does provide some income for the department, which allows us to do some management practices on our sites, whether it be for waterfowl, upland game, and whatnot, provide, hunting parking lots, and so forth. There's a variety of ways that we utilize the funds and utilize our tenants. Our tenants sometimes do some work off items for us, and then we kind of deduct that from the rent, kind of in-kind services, so to speak. But, we have, we got 230 plus leases statewide, and that's not necessarily 233 sites. We have about 115, 120 sites that we have ag leases on for about 36,000 acres. The majority of those are grain leases. We do have a handful of pasture and a handful of hay leases. Then there's some leases that have grain and hay intermixed, because like we talked about, the interspersion of agriculture for wildlife habitat. We'll have some wheat ground that we will come back and sow some legume onto, and we'll keep that legume for the next year over, and we will bale that to keep the integrity of it, but it's for wildlife management. So some of those are kind of mixed. So widely, and also within our ag leases, a very popular program with the department is the dove program. We do have a very popular dove program, and it's the first really big, hunting season of the year, so to speak. Everybody's kind of ready to get started. So it's important. And we utilize our tenant farmers to plant and manage those sunflower fields for us, so we can manipulate it for the dove program. So that's another example how we utilize our tenants. So it's a huge program that I think is mutually beneficial to a lot of people within the state of Illinois.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Mike. That's super helpful. I heard that obviously our agencies are underfunded, so it's a very valuable source of income for the state and for the department. And then it's really neat to hear the way that we use tenants to manage those dove fields and help contribute to those hunting programs. So that's kind of historically the benefits of the Ag Lease program, right? And so what sort of things are you guys doing, starting to implement to help bring the program even more in line with DNR's mission as an agency?
What we're doing, since, Bob and I both kind of came into these positions about the same time. And Bob and I have worked together prior to coming into these, and we kind of had some ideas on what we wanted to do to kind of bring us into more regenerative, more, better, I ain't gonna say better agriculture, but a different side of agriculture to include cover crops. That's a big program that we're getting ready to implement. We're kind of in infancy stage with that. We do have an RCPP partnership with that. And we've been working with the Farm Bureau, and we've had some workshops in the last couple of years to kind of educate some of our tenants, educate the neighboring tenants on how we want to do that. And the goal is to help our soil health. Our soil health has, be honest with you, been a little deficient over the years. And we think that that's going to take us 5, 6, 7 years out before we really start seeing the benefit of that. And, once we get to that point, we're hoping that, fertilizer and some chemicals, will reduce the need for some of that, while also providing some wildlife habitat, above ground, like Bob always mentions. And I don't know the exact number. He might be able to chime in on, how many species and what actually live underneath the top of the soil and that will benefit, that helps that out. So, that's an example of some things we're doing. We have, over time, we generally don't have large fields, so to speak, especially in our more of our upland areas. The middle part of the state. We have like a Jim Edgar Panther Creek, for example. When we got it used to be called Site M. When we acquired it, we had some larger tracts. 100, 152 acre fields, 100 acre fields, and over time we have reduced those down to where they're 40, 50, 60 acres. We put filter strips, we put wildlife buffer strips and corridors in those to try to help the habitat along the way. So we're trying to increase, and we look at that. We're involved with the nutrient load reduction strategy with Department of Ag and Illinois EPA. So we look at that to try to utilize our programs and implement some best management practices to help reduce the sediment and nutrient load going into the Illinois watershed eventually. So it's a process. It's a process we're starting, and it's going to be a long process, but we are making significant ground on that. You got anything to chime in, Bob, you think might add to that?
I mean, as far as life below ground, there's 10 times as much life below ground than there is above. The majority of what you see above ground is all dependent upon what's in your soil, and that's why good soil health is very important to maintaining a healthy natural resource. And so we did receive a cover crop as part of our RCPP, a Regional Conservation Partners Program grant here, working with the Conservation Fund and several other partners across the state. And basically what we're looking to do is take about 8,000 of the acres, about 32 or 1/4 of the row crop acres that we have in the state, to reduce tillage, cover crop rotation. And what we're hoping to do with that is to help build soil health, as well as create overwintering wildlife habitat for like birds and that kind of stuff migrating through the state, as well as we often get requests from our hunters on the land for food plots. And we don't like to really plant food plots per se, but if we're out there planting something that is going to help increase, the soil health, increase the soil fertility, it's in the end going to help us build our soils and hopefully get higher cash rents off of those later to help fund further projects on the parks, as well as leave some food out there for deer and other wildlife over winter. It's a win-win-win all the way around. And so, with that Regional Conservation Partners program, we're just now starting to get to the federal side where the federal dollars are going to start coming through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. So we'll be working with our tenants here in the coming months to hopefully get them enrolled in that as well.
And to kind of go along with that, we do and have implemented over the last couple of years some more restrictions on some of our fertilizer pesticides that we use. We do have a restriction, there's no dicamba use on our state sites. And also that we have implemented that on soybean seed. It's kind of hard with the corn, but on soybean seed, we restrict any neonicotinoid fungicide on any of that. And also we're encouraging that they use some sort of fluency agent with that to reduce the dust of any fungicide that might be involved. So again, those are baby steps, but we are gaining ground and educating, and it does take time because our leases are bid out. They're on 4-year contracts. Okay, so so now we're getting through. Like I said, I've been on 4 years, so this will be the last cycle of our new leases that we're starting to implement some of these new ones, and then next year will be the starting over the ones that we bid out in 19, and some of those we didn't have some of these in. So we're educating as we go. Unfortunately, it takes 4 or 5 years before we really can get the whole state caught up, into our new practices. So I would say by 2023, everybody, all the sites, all the leases will be caught up. But I'm sure there's going to be something new come along that we decide that we want to do that we feel is good by partnering with the Farm Bureau and other partners. I just got another email for some groups up in the northeastern part of the state that they're really interested in what we're doing on how they manage their ground. So we're going to kind of get together with them and explain where we're going. And they might have some good ideas for us as well. Like I said, we work with the Farm Bureau. We work with the Illinois Department of Ag and discuss things with them on a regular basis. So, we do try to partner and be open-minded, as we move on.
And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the RCPP is our contracts currently, they're 4-year periods, so our lease agreements. And so that's what we're looking at the RCPP basically to do 4 years of helping cost share the cover crop incorporation onto the state sites. So we understand it costs money. All the agricultural literature shows it takes 3 to 5 years to get over the hump for the reduced input costs and stuff to make it more profitable for our tenants and stuff as well. And so that's how we set up the RCPP, that basically half of the money it costs to plant, and if you need to terminate it, the cover crop, we're going to allow them to write that off of their ag lease. And then the other side is they'll get a payment from the NRCS to help cover the other 50% of it. And so over the 4-year period, we're hoping to increase our soil health, hopefully reduce the amount of inputs that they have to put in to the property. And then we're going to require it in our leases going forward. And so we're basically trying to help them get over the hump, get it started and everything like that. And then required in our leases going into the future to maintain the benefits and everything like that. Another key thing that has been changed is we do not allow fall nitrogen application on the parks either anymore. Just as Mike stated about the nutrient loss reduction strategy, we met with the NRCS and the Illinois Department of Ag and talked to them about that. And, it was one of the key ways to help reduce the amount of nitrogen and other fertilizers that were lost off of our fields. And so we've put that into our new lease agreements going forward. We do encourage our tenants to plant more legumes if they're worried about nitrogen as a cover crop, to help build it, or else, plant like rye and stuff that'll help bind it and keep the nitrogen that's on the field there during the year. So.
And other things that we don't allow any fall tillage on our state sites. Okay. We do allow, however, we're learning and just through talking and working with our tenants, there are some sites where some of the fields we do have some severe soil compaction problems. So we will allow them to do and utilize some subsoilers, sort of a paraplow where it has a deep shank that can get down and rip underneath, but minimize the soil disturbance on top. So we leave that residue on there. So, we feel that that's a beneficial program or a tool, so to speak. But we require our tenants to stay in contact with us. Before they were to do something like that, let us know so we know what's going on, just in case there's something else that we'd like for them to do, or we might not want them to do that field for some particular reason. But those are some of the things that we're trying to implement as we go on.
Yeah, and I'm going to go a little bit off script, but that sort of gets at something that I was thinking about. You mentioned the cost share. Can you talk a little bit about the support that you offer farmers as they're making these changes? Because I think that is one of the coolest pieces. And I live just south of Jim Edgar Panther Creek State Fish and Wildlife area, so I'm really familiar with the leases here and how the part of the agriculture economy that is. And I'm really interested and excited about the fact that farmers might be exposed to practices that they're not operating on their own land or other cash rented properties that they're farming. And are you guys thinking about that opportunity, or of yourselves as leaders in climate smart agriculture? How are you guys thinking about that piece, and how are you supporting farmers is I guess the question.
Well, right now, like I said, Bob's going to mention, right now the only thing that we allow or we have cost share available to help them out financially is going to be on the cover crop side. Right now we haven't really discussed moving forward how to help on other ways. The one thing we do know, based on if you look at average rents, cash rent across the state and certain counties, our rents are lower, and we know that. So I guess in a way that's kind of helping cost share. We do accept and have lower rents for that reason, because they do have to do a lot of things differently than they do on their properties that they farm or that they lease out from other tenants. Fields are smaller, like I said, no fall tillage, certain things along those lines, leaving some crops standing. And it's difficult. We do hear some moans and groans of having to farm some of our smaller fields. It's kind of a pain for them. They, and I understand
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
I understand that. They want to get in and utilize larger fields so they can, kind of run and gun and do what they can. And we understand that, and we appreciate that. We appreciate them working with us. So we realize that our rents are just a little bit lower. However, on some of them, such as Jim Edgar, they are competitive because there is quite a bit of interest. We do have a lot of people bidding on those. So the market will kind of dictate, where it will be, but we do understand it'll be lower.
So the cost share through the RCPP is going to work that the farmer they currently already submit a service work report with us, what equipment they use to plant crops or do the different types of work that we ask them to do through our leasing contracts. And so we're going to allow up to 50% of that to be written off of their ag lease. So it's going to lower their payments to us directly. The other half can be submitted to the NRCS and basically be a direct payment, a land management payment through the RCPP. And so they can recoup up to 100% of the cost potentially of planting these crops. And yes, that's exactly what we want to do with this type of rotation, is teach our tenants or give them the opportunity to learn to use these systems in their operation so that they can go back to their own land, which is generally adjacent or near our state parks, and start implementing those on their property as well. The biggest hurdle comes down to economics. Of course, we all know the bottom dollar does make a difference. And it can be, some years, especially when you're starting out, you can take a yield loss and that kind of stuff, trying to implement these new practices and learning how to do it. And that's what we're trying to do with the RCPP on our land, is basically give our tenants an opportunity to learn how to use this system, how it can work into their operation, as well as we got the biggest demonstration site available across the state. It's a public owned land that people can see, go to, we can have public meetings, all that kind of stuff. And as many of you know, working with farmers, it's mouth-to-mouth contact is one of your best tools. So if you can get somebody to start implementing these practices on part of their operation, they're going to be talking to their buddies and all their neighbors and everybody else at the coffee shop, talking about how it worked for them and how they can implement it better onto their land. And like Mike said, there's a lot of moaning and groaning. Sometimes nobody likes change. Granddaddy did it this way, and this is the way we're going to do it. as well. Well, your granddad also used asbestos, and we know better than that. And so as we continue to learn and move down the road, we have to adapt to new challenges and everything else. And we're trying to do it in a way that benefits the natural resources as well as benefits wildlife, aids in our hunting programs, and benefits the tenant farmers as well. Because, with the climate change stuff, we're definitely trying to take the lead on that and sequester carbon. And so going down the road, we're hoping to get more into the carbon markets and stuff and increase the income off of our agricultural leases as well. We're going to start tracking that. We started doing our own soil samples here within the last 3 years. So every lease that's coming up, we go out and do the sampling of those areas. Generally, we have private contractors go do it. This year, I went and pulled a bunch of soil samples and had those analyzed for soil fertility. We're also working with U of I to do further analysis of those samples to include like soil organic content and that kind of stuff, and help track our soil health over time. And that's what we're trying to do, is to start tracking that, get a baseline data, and move forward to hopefully get into those carbon markets. And plus, we want to make sure that they're not mining our property. This is state-owned property. We don't want the farmers to continue to take and deplete the soil fertility. And that's part of the problem with 4-year leases and then have to be bid back out, is the farmers aren't guaranteed to get that in the next thing. So coming back to putting lime on or fertilizer and stuff,
making those investments into something
Correct.
they might not have, right?
Correct. And so we're still looking into ways to increase the longevity of our leases as well. And we actually just had a meeting last week with our legal counsel on some potential possibilities for increasing the length of our leases, and which will give the tenants more stability, more knowledge to help invest into the property that they know that they're going to have for a longer time. So we're kind of looking into different ways and metrics to gauge, how do we say they're the good tenant and not, and so we're trying to look at that stuff right now. But the wheels of government sometimes turn slow, as you all know, and it's a one step at a time. The Mona Lisa wasn't painted in a day, and so we're all trying to get through this to keep moving forward and track our progress and keep a good idea of what our soil health is and fertility. And we have minimum standards that we set up that we're trying to build up to. And so when a new tenant gets a farm lease, we've taken the soil samples at the end of the last lease. And so at the end of the next 4-year period, we're going to take soil samples again. And if the minimum fertility and stuff is not there, then we have some jaws to come back, basically to have the previous tenant bring those back up to the levels that we need, at least back up to what they started at, if not up to the minimum levels that we want. And mostly that comes down to like the pH and additional lime and that kind of stuff. So
Super cool. It's all, I know you guys are saying that it's moving slow, but I feel like you guys have taken a bunch of big leaps in the last like 3 years or so, 3-4 years.
So currently we have a little over 1,000 acres that are in cover crop rotation. Some going into their second year of doing it, working with the tenants, and we're kind of using those as pilot sites to figure out what works, what doesn't, what works with our hunting programs. I mean, there has been some hard learning. Wayne Fitzgerald State Park is one of our large sites. We actually did have a field day down there last year, but the tenant that was doing that was using a diverse cover crop mix, which included a lot of turnips and radishes, which, from a soil health perspective, that's great, but from a hunter's perspective, the guys that were out there upland bird hunting and were twisting their ankles, walking across the field, trying to bird hunt, they weren't very happy with that. And so we're still trying to find that right mix of, being able to get the soil health benefits, still improving our hunting programs as well, and trying to keep the constituents happy, the customers, as well as they come out to utilize our sites for hunting opportunities. So, needless to say, we cut back on turnips and radishes in those areas just to, try to please them. But there's still such a diversity and array of cover crops that can be used that are still beneficial to the soil health and can meet the demands of the farmer for fertilizers and improve soil health, is still meeting the needs of our hunting and increasing hunting habitat as well.
Are you guys finding yourselves having to provide much education to the leases, or are you working with the Farm Bureau or other partners for that? Or is it because you're requiring cover crops, you're really only going to attract farmers that are sort of getting into that knowledge? How does that work?
Well, what
I've
we're
been doing
doing,
quite a bit of
we're,
education and talking to people about what cover crops can be used in different priorities. I do steer them towards other groups that do know more. American Farmland Trust,
Yep.
some of those other groups. I mean, there's a lot of good online resources as well. The cover crop Midwest cover crop calculator, looking at your soil types and your stuff that you want to use for that. And so there are a lot of resources. Of course, send them into their local NRCS office as well. Talk to the district conservationist. I know Mike's constantly on the phone too, talking about these different programs.
Yeah, well, that's what I was wondering, how much of your time, like, because we talked about the cost share bank support, but like just your time and knowledge in sort of walking through what a plan is or what some ideas are is a big support for farmers as well.
Yeah, and I imagine going down the line, I went and did the NRCS technical service provider training for the soil health, and so I'll probably be helping writing a lot more of those plans coming up now that the federal money is supposed to start flowing basically here this next spring. So I know here this winter, we're going to have a big push with our tenants, especially on our new leases that are coming up, as well as some of our larger ag lease sites to push those out. But, NRCS needs the plan. So I'm going to hopefully help the tenants get through some of those as well.
Do you guys track or collect information at all about the tenants' practices on their other acreage?
You mean on their private ground? Is that what you're referencing?
I'm thinking about how cool a story it would be to say, like, 10% of our tenants adopted cover crops here, and now they're doing it on their own acreage, and that's contributing to our parks because they're all their land's within the same watershed or something like that. So I just didn't know if you'd thought about that.
Well, actually, I'll be honest with you, I hadn't. Bob might have. He's shaking his head that he might have.
That's what we're going to start requiring as soon as we get going into within our CS Miami to fill out the STAR forms. And so, they're supposed to do that on every field that they have, which we can't make them do. But I have a feeling if we have our tenant farmers that are, getting the cost share to fill out the forms for our properties and so we can help track what we're doing, that we can probably capture some of that information through that program as well. So we're hoping to utilize STAR and their worksheets and stuff on our stuff so we can track our progress. But I think some of those questions and stuff in their form as well will help pertain to the private land that they're also farming on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, we have a few leases where we have multiple tenants, and on a couple of those, there is, sometimes there's one tenant that's already doing cover crops and already doing stuff, and they have been kind of coming to us over the last 4 or 5 years wanting to, and we say, yeah, go ahead. And now that we're getting into it, they're really jumping on board, and we're hoping, that'll carry over and show some of the other tenants that hey, we can, do this. But, like Bob said, sometimes it's an age thing, if it's a younger tenant, older tenant, and how they're doing. Some of them, to be honest with you, are just, we have, there's some where one tenant says it just won't work. It's going to work. No one in their right mind would do cover crops. Why are you doing cover crops? And then there's a tenant that has ground on the same site that's been doing it, and he likes doing it because he's seeing the benefit. So it's going to take education, and sometimes, as you said, you live around Jim Edgar, south of there, so you drive around and you kind of see what's going on, and people start asking questions. Hey, what is that? What is that? Well, who's doing that? Why are they doing that? And the word will spread. Like Bob said, sometimes between farmers is the best way to spread it. But it's a slow moving fire or slow moving snowball, that we're getting going. But we're hoping through time it's going to build steam, and I'm pretty confident it will.
Yeah, I am too. I think you guys are doing some really cool things with this program. I'm trying to think. You guys hit on a lot of the other things.
Yeah, I noticed we were kind of jumping ahead of you a little bit.
I
Sorry.
think it worked pretty, yeah, because I'd asked about how you're tracking, and I know you mentioned you're doing soil health testing. Is there any other ways that you're tracking improvements to the properties, whether that's habitat or I know you had already mentioned soil health.
Well, there have been some
as far
preliminary
as the habit-
discussions. Go ahead, Mike.
All right. I mean, you know, like I said, Bob was going to touch on something, and I won't touch on that. I'll let him take care of that. But, you know, just by looking at what we've done over the years, you know, like I said, you know, for 18 years, I was the district wildlife biologist, you know, in the Havana office. Jim Edgar was one of my sites, Lake San Chris was, Sanganoi and some others. And, you know, over that time, you know, we do have some spotlight routes we run that kind of go through some of the periphery of the sites. Some of the sites are smaller. You know, the one thing it's hard to be honest with you, the manpower, and that's why Bob's going to touch on this, for our biologists, our field staff to go and do bird count surveys and whatnot. We do that. Most of us have, I had, and most of them still do have bird count surveys. And initially that started, it was a pheasant call count. That was all it was. And we would put down, yeah, we might have heard this, might have heard that. And then 10 years ago, that changed. And now we're listening for more grassland nesting birds, you know, than we are just for huntable species. And hopefully we'll be able to take that to the next level and maybe utilize and do that on some of our state sites, because I think that is important. You know, but, you know, right now, you know, we look at, unfortunately, right now, just all we really look at is huntable. You know, I look at what our harvest was. We ask our hunters what they saw, you know, so we can kind of track that. But that is something on our larger sites we're gonna need to do, especially with this cover crop going in. And I'll go ahead and segue that into what Bob was going to mention that we want to do with U of I.
Yep. So we've been working with U of I for the last 2 decades almost on our state acres for wildlife enhancement, safe acres. They've been doing different bird surveys and stuff for us across state, Dr. Ward and his lab over there. And they also do surveys on many of our state parks, including Jim Edgar, Panther Creek, Pyramid, 10 Mile Creek down in, you know, southern Illinois, and several other our state sites. And so as we're incorporating these cover crops onto our state sites, they're already going to be out there doing different bird surveys and that kind of stuff. And so we'll be able to look at the differences between the incorporation of cover crops and using those if that's going to create additional overwintering bird habitat. I know Dr. Ward's lab has already released, I know at least one paper about cover crops and avian use of those fields. We're hoping to get more data from that. We also have areas on some of our parks that we're currently allowing the tenant to farm. So he goes in and plants a crop, and then nobody touches it for 2 years. So no spraying, nothing like that. So it's allowed to come up and weeds and kind of go fallow almost with a standing crop in there. And I mean, that's great, you know, brood rearing habitat for a lot of your upland game species. So looking at some of those smaller offshoot areas that a lot of the farmers don't really like to farm anyway, and trying to incorporate those practices in. Yeah, they still got to plant it, but they don't have to at least get a combine or anything in there. And we're creating more early successional habitat. You know, that's good for, you know, quail and pheasants and other early successional species. So.
Cool. That's super cool. So this question is off the cuff. I just thought of it. So if you don't have an answer, that's totally fine. We'll cut it out. Do you know, are other states doing things like this, or is Illinois, are we sort of following a pattern, or are we sort of leading the way here with sort of state managed properties like this?
Well, I do know that there's other states that have, I think, taken it, to another level in terms of neonics, especially on what they've done. So I would say that in that regard, I think we're ahead of some other states for sure. But there's a handful of Midwestern states that have taken it to a different level. And maybe not just the state itself, but maybe on some of the federal ground, that is being farmed. I think they're at a little bit different level than we are. So I would say, we're not in the lead, but we're not far behind.
Okay.
At this point, there's some that are at a different level.
Yeah.
And as Mike talked about earlier, it's a lot easier to get untreated soybean seed. The problem with getting untreated corn seed is you basically have to put the order in as soon as the seed's coming out of the field, because they almost treat it.
You have to be standing there with your hands out.
Correct. And so the states that are ahead of us with the neonics, they basically no corn or no soybeans can be treated with neonic, pesticides. Well, in those cases, most of those states are purchasing the seed to be put onto their fields later for the tenant. And so that's what they're going out and ordering all of the seed. And a lot of other states don't have as large of an ag leasing program as we do, especially. And so, being able to have that much outlay and knowing exactly, and if something changes, then we would basically be out of that, because come a wet spring, we have this every year, and Mike can attest more than me that we have to change crops sometimes. It's too wet for corn, and we end up going with a milo, or changing it over to soybeans or something else, just depending on. We do set up the cropping plans on an annual basis, but they are subject to change based on weather and other factors that come into play. So that's the main reason we haven't. Like I said, the soybean seed we can readily get, and so we went ahead, and that's still half of our acreage that's row cropped every year doesn't have neonics in it, and then we add make them add fluency agent to the corn when they're planting it to reduce the amount of dust and other particles, out there that could potentially hurt the insects.
I didn't even
like
think.
Bob mentioned, and I want to backtrack just a little bit, and Bob touched on it when we were talking about the leases up front. We do, our district wildlife biologists, they actually write the cropping plans for all of our leases on our state sites. So they'll set it out, 4 years in advance, whether it's going to be just a corn bean rotation, they want to throw wheat or the legume in there. So, and again, that's all decided based on what hunting programs we have in the area, what our goals are. And, for the most part, we stick to those cropping plans. So when the tenant bids on it, like right now, I had 2 pre-bid meetings today, and prospective tenants came in. We discussed the cropping plan. We discussed our lease requirements, so they know going in. So when they send us the bid here in a couple of weeks, they're bidding it based on what crops they're going to plant over those 4 years. But every year we do have, wet springs or something that's going to happen on some of our sites where we do have to adjust those, accordingly. But I wanted to touch on that we do set the cropping plans, so they just don't, get the lease for 4 years and, can plant what they want. It is, we do, manage that part of it.
Yeah, the whole time I was thinking, are you guys okay? Because you're dealing with all the stresses of farming and agency work at the same time. It must be a lot of hard work for you guys.
I wish it was only half that I wore.
Let me think. What other questions do we have? And you touched a little bit on like the leasee process. Do you want to just give like a quick overview about how you become a leasee and any equity measures that are built into that process to make sure that we are giving an equal chance to folks that may be underrepresented in a farming community? And so it's not just sort of going to the same folks that may have been farming or have a lot of resources.
Yeah, the way the process is set up, like I said, right now they're bid out on a 4-year basis. What we do is the initial process, the district biologist, they'll write the cropping plans, the lease requirements based on like if they want to have the work off items, or if we're planting a sunflower field, they'll put specific dates. Here's when the field has to be planted. We want you to mow it at this date. Here's how you're going to mow it. All those specifics are written in there, so they know exactly going in what their input costs are going to be with that. And then once that's set, then we have procurement rules that we have to abide by, state statute procurement rules. And then, so what we do is then we'll send the maps, we'll send the cropping plan, we'll send all the information to procurement. They'll put it together. We have a basic contract that is the same for all leases except for those lease requirements that I mentioned, and those can be different for each site, okay? And then we will set when we have our pre-bid meetings. Traditionally, pre-COVID, our pre-bid meetings were mandatory and they were at the site. So if you wanted to bid on it, you had to show up. And at that point, the only advertisement that we did was through a local newspaper. That was it. Excuse me. So really the word probably wasn't being spread as well as it could, because that's probably one thing you don't hear about at the coffee shop or at the lunch table. No one wants to tell you when they got an idea on when something's going to come up.
Mhm.
All right. So I'm sure, there wasn't a lot of a word being spread. So now we have a new procurement process. It's called bid buy, and that is supposed to kind of govern and I don't want to say regulate, but ensure that it's equally distributed across, the whole state, that everyone has an opportunity. Okay, whether we're gonna purchase something from somebody, we'll put, for that regard in bid buy, we'll put out the specs. If we want to buy a tractor from one of the sites, we put out specific specs. That goes out on bid buy, and then anybody can bid. We will provide that to you for this cost, and then we'll know who we're going to purchase it from. So you just kind of kick that around for bid buy for our ag leases. Then what we do is we will put those out on bid buy and advertise that way. Now, if you want to have a contract with the state, you have to be registered in bid buy. Okay, it has to be. Well, the bid buy process started 3 years ago. So like I said, it takes 3 or 4 or 5 years to kind of get everything rolling. So once we get into next year, we'll be set. So 3 years ago, they had to register in bid buy. So all those tenants are in bid buy. Well, when we advertise now for our leases, like I cannot, or the program cannot let anybody know specifics about a lease until it's posted in bid buy and on our system, okay? Then at that point, we can say, here's how many acres, here's what the crops are, all that, and or come to the pre-bid meeting. Because like I said, let me back up a little bit. Once COVID hit, obviously we couldn't have mandatory in-person meetings. So we went to where we have WebEx is what we utilize here. So we would have WebEx meetings, or you could phone in like I'm having to do here now to listen in and be a part of it. And we made them non-mandatory, okay? So you didn't have to show up and you didn't have to phone in, because if you register on bid buy, all the information is right there. The contract, the cropping plan, the maps, everything is right there. So then with that, without breaking any procurement rules, then we came up with a press release, just a generic press release that I can forward some of this information to you after this meeting, that just basically said, hey, I'll read it here. We only had 12 leases up for bid this year. Next year we're going to have 65. I mean, it's going to be a lot. It's one of our biggest years. So, we put out a press release that there's, 12 leases coming up for this year. Here's why we manage it. If you're interested, here's how you register on bid buy. Register on bid buy now, because once you're registered and you put in farming, the different codes, then whenever there's any lease up for bid anywhere in the state, you will get an email. So you could be in Winnebago County and Horseshoe Lake Alexander could come up, which it was bid this year. Well, they're going to get an email, so they're going to know. So we disseminated that throughout the state. I worked with the Farm Bureau a little bit on getting that out. I actually did an interview with them and put that out on their radio. So we're spreading the word that way. And what we're going to do then now, everybody that's in bid buy will get the information. And then once we get through this process, if you don't get the bid coming up, but you're in bid buy, you'll still get the information. So we will put out another press release probably in the spring, just reminding farmers and producers in the state, hey, we do have leases. They'll come up in the fall. If you want information on that, register in bid buy, and then you'll get the information. We started 2 years ago. We added to our DNR website some information about the leases and got into some more specifics, some of the questions you're asking today. about we write the cropping plans. Here are some of your responsibilities. Here's what you'll be required to do. Here's how the process works, and we'll update that. And then what we also want to do is moving forward to next year is we'll probably get some of this information out via our Facebook page. Granted, not everybody's on Facebook, but we can utilize that and try to utilize some of the social media that we have available. And again, those will be just generic press releases, generic information. Here's how to register, so when they come up, you'll be notified. Okay, so we are trying to utilize that platform, our social media platform, to get that information out. So again, it's baby steps, but we're making them and we're getting better at it.
Yeah, that's great. I think, one question. Has there been any talk about contracts for things other than corn and soy at all? I mean, I know you guys do sunflowers. Have you talked anything about local food or any other produce?
A little bit, more so in the northeastern part of the state than there has been downstate. But we did at one point, or we still do, I guess. I mentioned earlier that our Dove program, we have sunflower, or we have the tenants plant sunflowers, and on all the sites except for one, and the one is Jim Edgar Panther Creek. On all the other sites, we just mow it, manipulate it so the doves can come in and we can hunt it. Jim Edgar, we actually harvest them, so they're actually harvested and go to market. So, but Jim Edgar has the most sunflower acres than any site in the whole state.
Yeah, I knew they were harvested. I did not know they went to market though, like just for market value. Yep. That's cool. Cool.
Yeah, we've been doing that, 15, 16 years now.
And so then that's just a cash crop, and that's just funding back into the program.
Correct. It's and what we did to kind of I guess make it more profitable, I guess, for a tenant and put more interest in it. Instead of just having just sunflowers in that lease, we do have a few acres of corn, a few acres of beans, just to kind of sweeten the pot just a little bit. Sure. Okay, but yeah, but that lease, and actually that started with we had a farmer from Northern Illinois that actually contacted us and said, hey, I'm growing sunflowers. Do you guys have any sunflower leases in the state and whatnot? And the farm manager at the time was like, no, but there's a big site that we might be interested in doing something, because to be honest with you, some of our tenant farmers really don't want to plant them for us anyway. So it was an easy sell at that point, to do that. And then it just became, it was not profitable for the distance he had to go. So we just kind of evolved with it, and it made it more suitable to some of our local farmers in the area, by adding the corn and the beans to it. So that's about the only one, that it isn't, corn, beans, wheat. We do have some milo on some of our southern leases, but for the most part, not at this point. No one else has really approached us. There's some, like I said, there's some for, tomatoes and some of the stuff that you're, like I said, I don't know how far south of Jim Edgar you're from, but just west of there and north in Mason and Tazewell counties, in some of that sandy soil, there's popcorn, there's pumpkins and green beans and potatoes and a lot of that up there, but the soils kind of dictate that because they can irrigate, and do that. The soils up at Jim Edgar are a little more profitable, to stick with the corn and beans. So.
Super
and
cool.
if we plant anything else out there, the deer would eat us out of house and home, probably.
Sure was.
Well, and having a whole tomato field on a state park that's open to the public would just end up a lot of people walking off with a bunch of tomatoes. It'd be hard to keep them out of there and hard to regulate. What was it? Corn and soybeans, you can go any direction and find that kind of stuff. Whereas you start planting sweet corn. There's a reason farmers plant their sweet corn.
Their sweet corn patch.
Their sweet corn patch.
Yeah.
And that would be very similar with a food crop like that.
Yeah.
There has been some groups that talked to us about that in the past, but we kind of come down to the same thing on,
Yeah, that makes sense. That's just a question we get sometimes is what other crops have we been thinking about?
Sort of related to that too. And you may have just answered this, but has anybody approached you all about having like a hemp plot on any of these sites? I mean, I just know Department of Ag is really trying to figure out how to get this going in Illinois. There's been issues with like processors and a lot of other things, but I didn't know if anybody's approached you all about trying to do that with one of your sites.
There has, but there hasn't been. Yeah, there's been a little, but it hasn't really been serious. It's more of, hey, have you guys ever thought of it or whatnot? But no one has seriously contacted us and said, hey, we'd really like to get in that market. Is there a need for it? And, and what would the market be? Would it be monopolized by one person or one company, and gobble up everything that we did? So it's something that I mean, that's a good question. I'm sure it's going to come up. And it's something that why Bob has all them hats, he can put another one on and look into that and kind of have an answer so we're ready to go.
Yeah, well, so here, I know we've only got like 2 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we give Bob a chance to introduce himself because I think we skipped him at the beginning. But the only other question we have is just what else would DNR like to highlight about the program if there's anything that we didn't get to that you guys wanted to plug?
If not, that's hunters with a farming problem. I mean,
what's that, Bob?
That's primarily what we do our agricultural leasing for, and Mike hit on that earlier, is our hunting programs and ensure, good adequate wildlife habitat, edge habitat, early successional habitat, and that's what we use our tenant farmers to help maintain those habitat types for us. And those mostly are ideal for your edge species such as deer, turkey, quail, pheasant. Most of the hunting species in the state, and so we definitely do use our tenants to help maintain those programs. And then all the money that's raised off our agricultural leases go right back into the parks to improve hunting access and create better habitat for wildlife on the parks.
Yeah, so it's farming, but it's really habitat management all the way around.
Correct.
It is, and that's what I stress with the district wildlife biologist. I think some of the newer ones think, that my goal is, we're going to farm everything, and I'm like, no, we're utilizing this agricultural lease to manage for wildlife. Like I said, we want our tenants, truly want our tenants to be profitable. We really do, and bid accordingly so they can. But bottom line is, we're managing for the resource, and for the constituents of Illinois.
Thanks. Well, we appreciate your guys' time. This is fascinating to hear about. I know a lot of people are really excited and proud of the improvements that are being made. I know there's people in Eliot and I's world that have been advocating for some changes like this for a long time. So it's awesome to see it happening. And we'll be thinking of you guys next year when you're working through 65 leases. Eliot, do you have anything to add, or do you want to?
No, I think we need to get Bob to introduce himself.
Yeah. All right, we'll do this at the very end then. I'm Bob Keeney. I'm the Farm Programs Manager. I work in the Lands Division, which is all the state parks. I got many different hats that include the 3 game farms throughout the state where we raise pheasants for our controlled pheasant hunting program. I also work on the soil health aspect of the agricultural leasing program, as well as compliance and expenditures of the money we make and how it's spent on our parks. I also do all the field trial permitting across the state, as well as the dog training areas. And I also permit all the hunting preserves in the state as well. So I've been with the DNR for 10 years now. Originally started in the private lands division, working on a farm bill grant through the voluntary public access habitat incentive program. That was put on through the Farm Service Agency originally. And then I worked in the private lands division, working on the conservation stewardship program, working with private landowners to help reduce their tax burden. So Mike's been around a lot longer than I have, but I'm still learning the ropes from him. So
yeah, it's kind of funny. Bob's now managing the game farms, and when I was at EPA for 3 years prior to coming to DNR. I managed our household hazardous waste collection program back then, and when I came from EPA, I ran managed the game farm in Lincoln for 2 years. So yeah, so I did that early on as well, and now Bob's, kind of doing it. So we're kind of following. Well, he's kind of following me, I guess. So.
Well, that's why you're that much older than me.
Cool. All right. Do you want to end the recording, Eliot?
Yeah, I was gonna say, let me stop really quick.
Make sure we save it so we don't have to make them do this again.